This is the story of a 12-year-old boy who had nothing but a dream and an old piano. His name was Keon, and he lived with his mother in a small apartment on the rough side of Chicago. The walls were thin. The heater barely worked in winter. And most nights dinner was whatever his mother could stretch from her paycheck working double shifts at the hospital. But Keon had something that money could not buy. He had a gift. It started when he was 7 years old. His grandmother had taken him to church one Sunday morning, and he had watched the old man at the piano play hymns that made people cry and shout and raise their hands to the sky. Keon had never seen anything like it. How could someone make people feel so much just by pressing some keys? After the service, his grandmother noticed him staring at the piano like it was made of gold. She walked him over, lifted him onto the bench, and let him touch the keys for the first time. The sound that came out was just noise, random and messy. But something clicked inside his heart that day. He knew right then that he wanted to learn. His grandmother could not afford lessons. She could barely afford groceries. But she did something that changed his life. She found an old keyboard at a garage sale for $15. Some of the keys stuck, and the sound was tinny and cheap. But to Keon, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever owned. He taught himself to play using videos on his mother's phone. Night after night, he would sit on his bed with that keyboard on his lap, headphones plugged in so he would not wake the neighbors, and he would practice until his fingers hurt. He learned to read music by studying free lessons online. He memorized songs by watching other people's hands and copying every movement. By the time he was 10, he could play Beethoven. By 11, he had moved on to Chopin and Debussy. His school did not have a music program, so nobody there knew what he could do. His mother worked so much that she rarely heard him play either. The only person who truly understood his talent was his grandmother. She would sit in her rocking chair and close her eyes while he played, and sometimes tears would roll down her cheeks. She told him that God had put something special inside him, and that one day, the whole world would hear it. She made him promise that no matter how hard life got, he would never stop playing. Then 6 months ago, she passed away. Keon felt like a part of him died with her. She was the one who believed in him. She was the one who saw him when everyone else looked right through him. After she was gone, he almost gave up on music. What was the point if she was not there to hear it? But then he remembered his promise. He had told her he would never stop. So he kept playing, not for himself anymore, but for her. The community center, 14 blocks from his apartment, had an old piano in the back corner. It was out of tune and the bench was wobbly, but it was a real piano with real keys, and Keon went there every single day after school. He would walk through rain and snow and blistering heat just to sit at that piano and practice for hours. The people who worked at the community center started to notice him. They would stop what they were doing just to listen. A few of them recorded him on their phones and told him he was going to be famous one day. Keon would just shrug and keep playing. Fame did not matter to him. He just wanted to honor his grandmother's memory. Now, on this particular day in December, the temperature had dropped below zero. Keon had stayed late at the community center and missed his usual bus. By the time he started walking home, his fingers were numb and his coat was doing nothing against the wind. He was only halfway home when he realized he could not feel his toes anymore. He needed to get warm, and he needed to do it fast. Up ahead, he saw the golden lights of the Grand Belmont Hotel. It was one of those fancy places where rich people stayed, the kind of place that had doormen in long coats and chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. Keon had walked past it 100 times, but never once thought about going inside. Places like that were not for kids like him. But tonight he had no choice. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the lobby, and it was like walking into another world. The floors were made of marble so shiny he could see his reflection. The ceiling was 3 stories high with paintings of angels and clouds. There were velvet couches and golden lamps, and flowers arranged in vases that probably cost more than his mother made in a month. Soft music played from somewhere, and the air smelled like expensive perfume. Keon stood there shivering, his worn-out sneakers leaving wet marks on the perfect floor. People in suits and gowns walked past him without a second glance. He felt invisible, like a ghost that had wandered into the wrong building. And then he saw it. In the center of the lobby, Beneath the largest chandelier sat a piano. But not just any piano. This was a grand piano, jet black and polished to perfection, with keys that gleamed like pearls. It was the most beautiful instrument Keon had ever seen in his life. His feet carried him toward it before his brain could stop them. He knew he should not touch it. He knew someone would probably yell at him, but his grandmother's voice echoed in his head, telling him that music was meant to be shared, that his gift was not just for him but for everyone who needed to hear it. He sat down on the bench. The leather was soft and cool against his jeans. He lifted his hands over the keys and took a deep breath. The first note rang out pure and clear, filling the massive lobby with a sound so beautiful it made his heart ache. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move on their own, playing a piece by Chopin that he had practiced 1,000 times on that broken keyboard in his tiny bedroom. For a moment, he forgot where he was. He forgot about the cold and the fancy people, and the fact that he did not belong here. He was just a boy, and his music, the way it had always been. But the moment did not last. A heavy hand landed on his shoulder, and he opened his eyes to find a security guard standing over him with a frown on his face. The guard asked him what he thought he was doing and told him this piano was not a toy. Before Keon could answer, a loud voice cut through the air like a knife. It belonged to a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, with silver hair slicked back and a watch on his wrist that sparkled with diamonds. His name was Harrison Cole, and he was one of the richest men in the country. He owned buildings and companies, and more money than most people could even imagine. Tonight he was hosting a private charity event in the ballroom next door, and he had stepped out to take a phone call when he spotted the commotion. Harrison looked at Keon the way someone might look at a stain on their expensive carpet. He let out a short laugh and asked loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear what this was and whether someone had let in a stray. A few people behind him chuckled. Keon's face burned with shame. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never be seen again. Harrison stepped closer, his cold eyes scanning Keon's second-hand coat and beat-up shoes. He said the boy should probably stick to whatever corner he came from, that this piano cost more than his whole neighborhood. The security guard reached for Keon's arm to escort him out, but something inside Keon would not let him leave. Not like this. Not without showing them who he really was. He looked up at the wealthy man and asked one simple question. His voice quiet but steady. He asked, "Have you ever actually listened to someone play before deciding they are worthless?" The lobby went dead silent. Harrison's smile faded, replaced by something cold and dangerous. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody. He told Keon that if he thought he could actually play, he should go ahead and prove it. He said to give them all a show, and when the boy embarrassed himself, security would throw him out into the snow where he belonged. Keon turned back to the piano. His hands were still shaking from the cold, but now they shook from something else too. Anger, determination, and a quiet fire that had been burning inside him since the day his grandmother first put his fingers on those church piano keys. He thought about her. He thought about every person who had ever looked at him and seen nothing. He thought about all the nights he had practiced alone in his room while the world slept. Then he placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The first note Keon played was soft, almost a whisper. It floated up toward the high ceiling and hung there like a secret waiting to be told. A few people in the lobby smirked, expecting him to stumble, expecting him to prove Harrison Cole right. But then came the second note, and the third, and suddenly the whisper became a voice, and the voice became a storm. Keon's fingers moved across the keys like they had been born to do this and nothing else. He played the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. A piece so difficult that most pianists spent years trying to master it. But Keon did not just play the notes, he felt them. Every rise and fall, every moment of tension and release, poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. The lobby fell silent. A woman in a red dress stopped mid-conversation with her mouth still open. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses froze in place, afraid to move and break the spell. Even the security guard who had tried to throw Keon out stood there with wide eyes, his hand still half raised like he had forgotten what he was doing. Harrison Cole's smirk slowly faded. He had expected the boy to bang on the keys like a child pretending to be a musician. He had expected a few clumsy notes followed by embarrassed silence. He had expected to laugh and wave his hand, and have this little problem removed from his sight. But this was something else entirely. This was real. Keon kept his eyes closed as he played. He was not in the Grand Belmont Hotel anymore. He was back in his grandmother's living room, sitting on that creaky piano bench at church, while she hummed along from the front pew. He was in his tiny bedroom with the keyboard on his lap, practicing the same passage over and over until his fingers ached. He was everywhere and nowhere, all at once, lost in the music the way only someone who truly loves it can be. The piece built slowly, like clouds gathering before a storm. The notes climbed higher and higher, dancing and weaving together in patterns so beautiful they almost hurt to hear. Then came the crash, the thundering chords that shook the air and made people hold their breath. Keon's hands flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone his age. A woman near the back of the lobby put her hand over her heart. She did not know why, but tears had started forming in her eyes. She had heard this piece performed by professionals in concert halls. But somehow, this boy in his worn-out coat was making her feel things those performances never did. That was the difference. Those professionals played with skill. Keon played with his soul. Harrison Cole stood completely still. His face had gone pale, and there was something strange happening behind his eyes. Something he had not felt in a very long time. He could not look away from the boy at the piano. This child he had just mocked and insulted. This kid he had called worthless. The music swelled and then softened, like waves rolling onto a beach and then pulling back. Keon guided the melody through its quieter moments, with the same care a mother uses to hold a newborn. Every note had purpose. Every pause had meaning. More people had gathered now. Guests from the charity event in the ballroom had heard the music and drifted out to see what was happening. They stood in doorways and leaned over railings from the floors above, all of them watching this skinny 12-year-old boy create magic on a piano that cost more than most people's houses. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the music. Keon reached the most difficult part of the piece, a section where both hands had to work independently while still creating a unified sound. It was the part that tripped up even experienced pianists, the part that separated the good from the great. He did not miss a single note. His left hand rolled through the bass notes like distant thunder, while his right hand sang the melody high and clear. The two voices wove together perfectly, telling a story without words, a story of struggle and hope, and everything in between. Harrison Cole's throat felt tight. He tried to swallow but could not. There was something about this music that was cutting through all the walls he had built around himself over the years. Walls made of money and power, and the belief that he was better than everyone else. The music did not care about those walls. It went straight to the part of him he had buried a long time ago, the part that remembered what it felt like to be small and scared and overlooked. He shook his head slightly, trying to push the feeling away. He was Harrison Cole. He did not get emotional over some random kid playing piano. That was not who he was, but the music would not let him go. Keon moved into the final section of the Chopin piece, the part that always made him think of his grandmother. She used to say that the ending of this ballade sounded like someone finding peace after a long journey. Like finally coming home after being lost for years. He thought about her hands, how they used to shake when she got older, how she would still clap for him after every song no matter how many mistakes he made. He thought about her voice telling him that his gift was from God and that he had a responsibility to share it with the world. He thought about the last time he saw her, lying in that hospital bed with tubes in her arms, still smiling at him, still believing in him. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he did not stop playing. The final notes rang out across the lobby, hanging in the air like the last rays of sunlight before dark. Then silence. For a moment, nobody moved. It was like the whole world had stopped to catch its breath. Then someone started clapping. It was the woman in the red dress. She clapped slowly at first, then faster, and then others joined in. The waiter set down his tray and clapped. The security guard clapped. People on the upper floors clapped. Within seconds, The entire lobby was filled with applause that echoed off the marble walls and high ceilings. Keon opened his eyes, almost surprised to find himself back in the hotel. He looked around at all these wealthy strangers clapping for him, and he did not know what to feel. Part of him wanted to smile, part of him wanted to run, part of him wished his grandmother was there to see this moment. But then his eyes found Harrison Cole, and everything else faded away. The billionaire was not clapping. He was just standing there, staring at Keon with an expression that was hard to read. His jaw was tight, and his hands were clenched at his sides. He looked like a man who had just been punched in the stomach and was trying not to show it. The applause slowly died down as people noticed the tension between the boy and the rich man. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Harrison took a step forward. Then another. His expensive shoes clicked against the marble floor as he walked toward the piano. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. He stopped right in front of Keon and looked down at him for a long moment. The boy did not look away. He met the man's gaze with quiet dignity. The same dignity his grandmother had taught him to carry no matter how people treated him. When Harrison finally spoke, his voice was different than before. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that almost sounded like confusion. He asked where Keon had learned to play like that. Keon answered simply. He said his grandmother taught him. He said she passed away 6 months ago. Something flickered across Harrison's face. Pain? Maybe? Or recognition. It was there, and gone so fast that most people probably missed it. But Keon saw it. Harrison asked if Keon knew any other pieces. His voice was quieter now. Almost gentle. Keon nodded. He said he knew one more. He said he wrote it himself. For his grandmother. After she died. The crowd murmured with surprise. A 12-year-old who could not only play Chopin but also compose his own music? That was something special. That was something rare. Harrison Cole stepped back and gestured toward the piano. He told Keon to play it. It was not a command this time. It was a request. Maybe even a plea. Keon turned back to the keys. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. This piece was different from Chopin. This piece was his. Every note came from his own heart, his own pain, his own love for the woman who had believed in him when nobody else did. He had called it Still Here, because that was what he felt whenever he played it. Like his grandmother was still with him, like death had not really taken her away, just moved her somewhere he could not see but could still feel. He placed his fingers on the keys one more time, and then he began to play the most important song of his life. The lobby of the Grand Belmont Hotel had never been this quiet. Over 100 people stood frozen in place, their eyes fixed on the 12-year-old boy at the piano. Waiters had stopped serving, conversations had died mid-sentence. Even the soft background music that usually played through the speakers had been turned off by someone on staff who understood that nothing should compete with what was about to happen. Keon sat perfectly still for a moment, his hands resting on his lap. He was not nervous anymore. The fear and shame he had felt when Harrison Cole mocked him had melted away somewhere during the Chopin piece. Now there was only this. Only the music. Only his grandmother. He lifted his hands to the keys and let them hover there, feeling the cool air between his fingertips and the ivory. This song was different from anything else he had ever played. Chopin was beautiful, but it belonged to someone else. This piece belonged to him. Every note had come from his own heart during the darkest days of his life. He remembered writing it in the weeks after his grandmother's funeral. He could not eat, he could not sleep, he could not even cry because the pain was too big for tears. So he sat at that old keyboard in his bedroom and let his fingers find the notes that his voice could not speak. The first note of Still Here was so soft that people in the back of the lobby leaned forward to hear it. It was a single key pressed gently, like a question asked in a whisper. Then came another note, and another, building slowly into a melody that seemed to float in the air like smoke. The song did not sound like sadness. That was what surprised people. They expected something heavy and dark, a funeral march full of minor chords and tears. But this was different. This was light breaking through clouds. This was the warmth of a memory that refused to fade. Keon thought about the way his grandmother used to hum while she cooked dinner. She never followed recipes. She just threw things in a pot, and somehow, it always tasted like love. He thought about the way she laughed. This big, joyful sound that came from deep in her belly and made everyone around her smile. He thought about her hands, rough from years of hard work but always gentle when she touched his face. The melody grew stronger. It rose and fell like breathing, like the steady rhythm of a heart that refuses to stop beating. Keon's fingers danced across the keys, pulling out harmonies that seemed impossible from a single piano. It was as if the instrument itself had come alive and was singing along with him. A businessman near the front of the crowd took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. He did not know why he was crying. He had not cried in years, not even at his own father's funeral. But something about this music reached into his chest and squeezed. The woman in the red dress had given up trying to hide her tears. They streamed freely down her face, ruining her expensive makeup, and she did not care. She was thinking about her own grandmother, gone now for 20 years, and how she had never properly said goodbye. That was what the music did. It did not just make people feel Keon's grief. It unlocked their own. Every person in that lobby had lost someone. Every person knew what it meant to miss a voice they would never hear again, to reach for a hand that was no longer there. The song gave them permission to feel all of it. Keon moved into the second part of the piece, and the tone shifted. The melody became more complex, weaving between hope and sorrow, like a conversation between two old friends. There was pain in it, yes, but there was also gratitude. There was love that death could not erase. He remembered the last conversation he had with his grandmother. She had been so weak by then, her voice barely above a whisper, but her eyes were still bright. She had taken his hand and told him that she was not afraid. She said she had lived a good life and loved good people, and that was enough. She told him that whenever he felt alone, he should sit down at a piano and play, because she would be listening. She would always be listening. Keon had promised her through his tears that he would never stop playing, and he had kept that promise every single day since. The music swelled now, filling every corner of the massive lobby. It bounced off the marble floors and the crystal chandeliers and the painted ceiling 3 stories above. It wrapped around every person like a warm blanket on a cold night. Some people closed their eyes. Others held hands with strangers standing next to them. For these few minutes, there were no rich people or poor people. No fancy clothes or worn-out coats. There was only the music and the shared experience of being human. Harrison Cole had not moved from where he stood. His face had gone completely white, and his hands were trembling at his sides. He was not just listening to the music. He was being destroyed by it, because he knew this feeling. He knew it in his bones. 50 years ago, before the money and the power and the buildings with his name on them, Harrison Cole had been a different person. He had been a scared little boy growing up in a tiny apartment with a grandmother who worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. She had sacrificed everything for him. She had believed in him when he was nothing and nobody, and he had forgotten her. Not completely, of course. He still thought about her sometimes, late at night when sleep would not come, but somewhere along the way, in his desperate climb to the top, he had buried the boy he used to be. He had convinced himself that the past did not matter, that where he came from did not define him, that he had earned everything through his own hard work and talent. But standing here now, listening to this child pour his soul into a piano, Harrison could not hide from the truth anymore. He had become exactly the kind of person who would have looked down on him when he was young. He had become the villain in his own story. The music reached its climax, a cascade of notes that tumbled over each other like a waterfall, beautiful and overwhelming and impossible to look away from. Keon's whole body moved with the piano, swaying gently as his fingers flew across the keys. His eyes were closed and tears ran down his cheeks. But there was a small smile on his face. He was not sad. He was grateful. Grateful for every moment he had with his grandmother. Grateful for the gift she had given him. Grateful that even though she was gone, she was still here in every note he played. The final passage began, soft and tender, like a lullaby sung to a sleeping child. The notes slowed down, each one given space to breathe, to exist fully before the next one arrived. It was the musical equivalent of a long embrace, the kind you give someone when you know you might not see them again. And then, the last note. It rang out pure and clear, hanging in the air for what felt like forever. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The sound slowly faded until there was only silence. But it was not an empty silence. It was full, somehow, full of everything the music had made them feel. Keon lifted his hands from the keys and placed them in his lap. He opened his eyes and looked out at the crowd. And for the first time, he realized how many people were crying. Men in expensive suits dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Women in designer gowns had mascara running down their faces. Even some of the hotel staff standing along the walls were wiping away tears. Then the applause began. It started with one person, then 10, then everyone. People clapped and cheered, and some even shouted. It was not polite applause, the kind you give at a boring concert because you are supposed to. This was real. This was people expressing something they could not put into words, but Keon barely heard it. His eyes had found Harrison Cole again. The billionaire was still standing in the same spot, but he looked like a different man. His shoulders were slumped. His face was wet with tears. His whole body seemed smaller somehow, like the arrogance that had puffed him up before had leaked out and left only the person underneath. As the applause continued around them, Harrison Cole took a shaky step toward the piano. Then another. His movements were slow and uncertain. Like a man walking through a dream, he stopped right in front of Keon and opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He tried again, his voice cracking. He asked who taught Keon to play like that, but this time the question meant something different. This time it was not about skill or training. It was about something deeper. Something that had broken through every wall. Harrison had spent a lifetime building. Keon looked up at the man who had mocked him just minutes ago and saw something he did not expect. He saw pain. Real pain. The kind that does not come from nowhere, he answered softly. He said it was his grandmother. He said she always told him that music was how we remember the people we love. Harrison Cole's face crumpled. A sob escaped his throat before he could stop it. He pressed his hand over his mouth and closed his eyes, his whole body shaking. And in that moment, everyone in the lobby understood that something important was happening. Something that went far beyond a boy playing piano in a hotel. This was two broken people finding each other. This was the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The applause had faded. The crowd in the lobby had grown quiet again, watching the strange scene unfold before them. A billionaire stood weeping in front of a 12-year-old boy, his body shaking with sobs he could not control. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody had ever seen Harrison Cole like this. Keon remained seated at the piano, looking up at the man who had mocked him just a short while ago. He did not feel anger anymore. He did not feel satisfaction, or revenge, or any of the things you might expect. What he felt was something closer to sadness, because he recognized that kind of crying. It was the kind that came from somewhere deep and old, the kind that had been locked away for a very long time. Harrison pressed his hand against the piano to steady himself. His legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. He tried to speak, but his voice came out broken and rough. He said he was sorry. He said it again and again, like those two words were the only ones he could remember. I am sorry. I am so sorry. The security guard who had tried to throw Keon out earlier stepped forward, unsure if he should help his boss or give him space. Harrison waved him away without looking. He did not want help. He did not deserve help. He just needed to stand there and feel everything he had spent 50 years running from. A woman from the charity event, someone who had known Harrison for decades, whispered to her husband that she had never seen him show any emotion before. Not at funerals. Not at weddings. Not even when his own company almost went bankrupt 20 years ago. The man was made of stone. At least, that was what everyone believed. But the stone had cracked, and what was pouring out was a lifetime of buried pain. Harrison finally managed to take a breath. He looked at Keon with red eyes and asked if they could talk somewhere private. His voice was barely above a whisper. He said there was something he needed to tell him, something he needed to tell someone, and for reasons he did not fully understand, he wanted that someone to be this boy. Keon looked at the crowd of wealthy strangers watching them like they were a show. He nodded and stood up from the piano bench. The hotel manager appeared out of nowhere and offered them a private sitting room just off the main lobby. Harrison thanked him quietly and walked toward it with slow, heavy steps. Keon followed, unsure what was about to happen but knowing somehow that it was important. The sitting room was small and elegant, with leather chairs and soft lighting and paintings on the walls that probably cost more than Keon's apartment building. Harrison sank into one of the chairs, like a man who had just finished running a marathon. Keon sat across from him and waited. For a long moment, Harrison just stared at the floor. Then he started talking. He said that 50 years ago, he was born in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit. His mother left when he was 2 years old, and he never knew his father. The only family he had was his grandmother, a woman who cleaned houses during the day and worked at a laundromat at night, just to keep a roof over their heads. They had nothing. Some weeks they ate rice and beans for every meal, because that was all they could afford. Harrison wore clothes from thrift stores and shoes with holes in them. The other kids at school made fun of him. They called him names and told him he would never be anything. He learned early that the world was not kind to people like him, but his grandmother never let him believe that. She told him every single day that he was special. She said God had put something inside him, a spark that would grow into a fire if he just kept believing. She said that where you start does not have to be where you finish. Harrison's voice cracked as he talked about her. He said she used to sing while she worked, old gospel songs that filled their tiny apartment with warmth. He said she would come home exhausted at midnight but still find the energy to help him with his homework. He said she gave him everything and kept nothing for herself. When Harrison was 10, his grandmother saved up for 6 months to buy him a used keyboard from a pawn shop. It only had 61 keys and some of them stuck. But to Harrison, it was the most precious thing in the world. He taught himself to play just like Keon did, using library books and his own determination. Music became his escape from a life that often felt hopeless. His grandmother would sit and listen to him play for hours. She never complained, even when he hit wrong notes or played the same song over and over. She just closed her eyes and smiled like she was hearing angels. She died when Harrison was 16 years old. A heart attack took her in her sleep. One day she was there, singing in the kitchen, telling him she loved him. The next day she was gone. Harrison stopped playing piano after that. He could not bring himself to touch the keys without thinking of her, and thinking of her hurt too much. So he buried that part of himself. He threw all his energy into school, then into business, then into making money. He told himself that success would make the pain go away. If he just got rich enough and powerful enough, he would never have to feel small and helpless again, but it did not work. The pain never went away. It just went underground, hiding in the dark corners of his heart, waiting. Harrison looked at Keon with tears still streaming down his face. He said that when he heard Keon play tonight, especially that last song, something broke inside him. He said the music sounded exactly like what he felt when his grandmother died. The grief, the love, the desperate wish to hold on to someone who was already gone. He said he looked at Keon and saw himself. Not the billionaire in the expensive suit, but the scared little boy in the thrift store clothes. The boy who just wanted someone to believe in him. The boy he had tried so hard to forget. And then Harrison said the words that hit Keon like a punch to the chest. He said that when he mocked Keon earlier, when he laughed at his clothes and called him a stray, he was not really talking to Keon. He was talking to himself. To the boy he used to be. To the part of himself he was ashamed of. He said he had become exactly the kind of person who would have destroyed him when he was young, and he hated himself for it. The room fell silent. Keon sat very still, processing everything he had just heard. This man, this billionaire, who seemed to have everything, was just as broken as anyone else, maybe more broken, because he had spent so long pretending he was not. Keon thought about his grandmother. He thought about what she would say if she were sitting here right now. She was never the type to hold grudges. She always said that hurt people, and the only way to break the cycle was with grace. Keon spoke quietly. He told Harrison that his grandmother used to say something. She used to say that it is never too late to become the person you were supposed to be. She said that every day was a chance to start over, to make different choices, to be better. Harrison looked at him with something like wonder. Here was a child who had every reason to hate him, offering him words of comfort instead. It was more kindness than he deserved, more kindness than he had shown anyone in years. He asked Keon how he could just forgive him like that after what he did. Keon shrugged. He said holding on to anger would not bring his grandmother back. It would not change what happened. It would only make him bitter and hard, like a piece of fruit left out too long. His grandmother did not raise him to be bitter. She raised him to be kind. Harrison let out a long breath. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt something other than the cold emptiness that had lived inside him for decades. He felt hope, small and fragile, like a candle flame in a dark room, but real. He told Keon that he wanted to do something. He did not know what yet, but he wanted to help. Not to make himself feel better or to buy forgiveness, but because it was the right thing to do, because his grandmother would have wanted him to. Keon nodded slowly. He said that sounded like a good start. The two of them sat there for a while longer, not saying much, just existing in the same space. A billionaire and a poor kid from the South Side. Two people who should have had nothing in common but shared the most important thing of all. They both knew what it meant to be loved by a grandmother who gave them everything, and they both knew the pain of losing her. When they finally walked back out into the lobby, the crowd had mostly gone. The grand piano sat silent under the chandelier, waiting for the next person to bring it to life. Harrison looked at it for a long moment, then looked at Keon. He said he had not played piano in 50 years. But maybe, if Keon was willing, they could play something together sometime. Keon smiled for the first time that night. A real smile, not forced or polite. He said he would like that, and in that moment, something shifted. A door that had been closed for half a century creaked open just a little bit, and light began to pour through. That night at the Grand Belmont Hotel changed everything. Not just for Keon, but for Harrison Cole too. Sometimes life gives you a single moment that splits your story into before and after, and this was one of those moments for both of them. In the weeks that followed, Harrison did something he had never done in his entire career. He canceled meetings. He ignored phone calls from business partners. He stepped away from deals worth millions of dollars. None of it seemed to matter anymore. The music had cracked something open inside him, and he could not just tape it back together and pretend nothing had happened. He visited his grandmother's grave for the first time in over 30 years. It was a small headstone in a cemetery on the outskirts of Detroit, surrounded by weeds because there was nobody left to tend it. Harrison stood there in his expensive coat, feeling the cold wind on his face, and he wept like he had not wept since he was a child. He told her he was sorry. Sorry for forgetting where he came from. Sorry for becoming the kind of man who mocked children for being poor. Sorry for letting money and power turn him into someone she would not recognize. He stayed at that grave for 3 hours, talking to a woman who had been gone for decades, and when he finally left, he felt lighter than he had in years. The next morning, he made a phone call that would change Keon's life forever. Keon was sitting in his tiny bedroom, practicing on his old keyboard like he did every day, when his mother came in with a strange look on her face. She told him there was someone on the phone, asking to speak with him, someone important. When Keon heard Harrison Cole's voice, his first instinct was to hang up. This was the man who had humiliated him in front of all those rich people. This was the man who had called him a stray and laughed at his clothes and told him he did not belong. But Harrison's voice sounded different now, softer, almost nervous. He told Keon that he owed him an apology. A real one. He said that what he did that night was wrong, and that there was no excuse for treating another human being that way. He said that Keon's music had shown him something about himself that he did not like, and he wanted to make things right. Keon did not know what to say. He stayed quiet and let the man talk. Harrison explained that he wanted to pay for Keon's education. Not just any school, but the Chicago Academy of Music, one of the best music schools in the entire country. He said he would cover everything: tuition, books, instruments, whatever Keon needed. And if Keon's family wanted to move to a better neighborhood so he could be closer to the school, Harrison would help with that too. Keon's mother was listening on the other line, and she started crying before Harrison even finished speaking. She had worked double shifts for years just to keep food on the table, and now this stranger was offering to open doors she never dreamed possible. But Keon hesitated. He asked Harrison why. Why would a man who had treated him like garbage suddenly want to help him? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he told Keon the truth. He said that 50 years ago, he was just like Keon. Poor, overlooked, invisible. He said his grandmother had believed in him when nobody else did, and she had sacrificed everything so he could have a chance at a better life. He said that somewhere along the way he forgot all of that. He forgot who he was and where he came from. But Keon's music reminded him. He said he was not trying to buy forgiveness. He knew that what he did could not be erased with money. But he wanted to do something good with the years he had left. He wanted to be the kind of person his grandmother would have been proud of. Keon looked at his mother, her face wet with tears and hope. He thought about his own grandmother and what she would tell him to do. She had always said that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. She believed in second chances. She believed that people could change. Keon told Harrison okay, he would accept the help, but he had one condition. He said that Harrison had to promise to help other kids too. Not just him, but all the kids out there who had talent and dreams but no money or opportunity. Kids who were invisible like he used to be. Harrison agreed without hesitation. And he kept that promise. Within 6 months, he established a foundation called Rising Keys. It provided instruments, lessons, and scholarships to underprivileged children across the country who showed talent in music. Harrison did not just write checks and disappear. He visited community centers and schools and sat in the back of recitals, listening to children play the way his grandmother used to listen to him. He changed in other ways too. He started treating the people around him differently. His employees noticed it first. The man who used to bark orders and fire people for small mistakes became patient and kind. He learned the names of the janitors who cleaned his office building. He asked his assistant about her children. He became human again. Keon thrived at the Chicago Academy of Music. His teachers said they had never seen anyone with his combination of raw talent and emotional depth. He practiced harder than anyone else, arriving early and staying late, always pushing himself to be better. But he never forgot why he played. It was never about fame or awards. It was about keeping his grandmother's memory alive. 3 years passed. On a cold evening in November, Keon walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall. He was 15 years old now. Taller, more confident, but still the same boy who had taught himself piano on a broken keyboard in a tiny bedroom. The audience was filled with people who had paid hundreds of dollars to hear him play. Critics and musicians, and music lovers from around the world. But Keon only cared about one person in the crowd. Harrison Cole sat in the front row, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes already wet before a single note had been played. Beside him was an empty seat, with a single white rose resting on it. It was for Keon's grandmother. Harrison had insisted on it. The concert hall fell silent as Keon sat down at the grand piano. It was a Steinway, just like the one in the hotel lobby where everything had begun. He looked out at the audience for a moment, then closed his eyes and placed his hands on the keys. He played for 2 hours that night. He played Chopin and Beethoven and Debussy. He played pieces that had been performed by the greatest pianists in history. And the audience listened in awe, marveling at this young prodigy who played with the skill of a master and the heart of a poet. But the final piece was the one that mattered most. It was Still Here, the song he had written for his grandmother. As the first notes floated through Carnegie Hall, Harrison Cole felt the tears begin to fall. He did not try to stop them. He did not care who saw. He had learned that tears were not weakness. They were proof that you still had a heart capable of feeling. When the last note faded into silence, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls of the historic hall. People cheered and shouted and wiped their eyes. It was the kind of standing ovation that careers are built on. But Keon did not stand and bow right away. He stayed seated at the piano, his eyes closed, letting the moment wash over him. In his mind, he was not in Carnegie Hall. He was in his grandmother's living room, and she was sitting in her rocking chair, clapping her hands and telling him that she always knew he would make it. After the concert, a reporter asked Keon what his grandmother would think if she could see him now. Keon smiled, that same soft smile he always had when he talked about her. He said she was here. She had always been here. She was in every note he played, every song he wrote, every breath he took. Death could take someone away from you, but it could not take away love. Love stayed forever. Harrison Cole stood nearby, listening. He nodded slowly, his own heart full to bursting. He had spent 50 years building an empire of money and power, thinking that was what success looked like. But this moment right here, watching a boy he had once mocked become something extraordinary, feeling the music that had saved his own soul, being part of something bigger than himself. This was what success really meant. And as Harrison looked up at the ceiling of Carnegie Hall, he whispered a quiet thank you to his own grandmother, for never giving up on him, for planting seeds of goodness that somehow survived decades of neglect, for sending a 12-year-old boy into a hotel lobby on a freezing night to remind him who he really was. Some people believe that those we love never truly leave us. They live on in the choices we make, the kindness we show, the music we play. Keon believed that with all his heart, and now, so did Harrison Cole.